What's up? Let's talk about Baby Driver.
That's some Oscar shit right there.
I'm going to take these off because I can't see shit right now. Perfect. So, Baby Driver is the new Edgar Wright movie. It just hit cinemas about, a week and a half ago. And short version, I loved it. Long version, I loved it, but there are plenty of reasons that you might not love it. This is kind of, in many ways, me being on the flip side of the previous video about Wonder Woman, where I really, really walked to the theater loving that movie. Not everyone in our party felt that way, and I get the reasons why, and we're going to kind of walk through that a little bit. But to give you a bit of a backstory on this, so Edgar Wright, if you're not familiar with him, you really, really should make a point of getting out there and seeing that. He made Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and World's End. End of the World, World's End, I think, which is known as either the Cornetto trilogy or the Blood and Ice Cream trilogy, which stars Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in all three of those movies. Hysterical movies. There are these very action parody takes on three different sort of stories: a zombie movie, a police procedural movie, like a mystery, and an alien movie, and they all are hysterical. He also is the guy behind Scott Pilgrim versus the World's movie adaptation, which is one of the coolest, most stylistically awesome movies I've ever seen. Amazing references to video games and comics and movies and all sorts of things like that. Very quick, tight, punchy kind of stuff. And it's no surprise that Edgar Wright was going to be the man behind Ant-Man, until Edgar Wright and Marvel came to an impasse and realized that while, yes, Edgar Wright was ready to make a Marvel movie, Marvel wasn't quite ready to make an Edgar Wright movie. I would love to have seen what Ant-Man from Edgar Wright would have been, but unfortunately, we didn't get to see it. I still enjoyed Ant-Man, but it had its flaws. But I would have loved to see an Edgar Wright one a little bit more. So instead, we have 4 awesome, amazing movies from Edgar Wright that if you haven't seen those, go check them out. All 4 of them are fucking awesome. And now he's made Baby Driver, a movie that he's been working on, or at least putting together in his head since, I think he said 1994. And there's a really neat sort of mishmash of like time periods kind of woven through it, all the way from and this comes in through the music too, but from the 50s through to today, you have little bits and pieces of everything. It is, for all intents and purposes, a sort of a heist movie. It's definitely an action movie, an action thriller. And it's, I guess, more set against the backdrop of a heist movie, even if it's not really about the heist itself. It stars Ansel Elgort, I think that's his name, as Baby, B-A-B-Y, Baby. He is a driver. He is the wheelman for the criminal operations going on in the movie. We're going to get into those guys in a second. You get to see a little bit. His sort of deal is he's trying to get out of the criminal world. He's got a debt to be paid, and he's just trying to get on out of there. And the hijinks, they do ensue. One of the most fucking awesome things about this movie, something that, as far as I'm aware, wasn't advertised at all, maybe should have been, because really, I don't know that I would have necessarily been more interested in it knowing this, but it certainly was cool to me to know it, and then seeing it in person, it was amazing. And that is that nearly the entirety of this movie is set to music. And when I say that, I don't mean, oh, there's music playing in the background. I mean, not only is this almost played up like a musical itself, but most of the action in the movie is synced up with the beat or the lyrics or something going on with the music. And in some cases, they play with the fourth wall a little bit, where the music that's playing in the scene is actually music on Baby's iPod. And they mess with that a little bit. They do a very cool thing where he's got headphones in for most of the movie, and it's explained at one point that he has tinnitus from an accident when he was a kid, and so he kind of tries to drown it out with music just so he doesn't hear that high-pitched all the time. Whenever he's got his headphones in, you're listening to the music. If he pulls out, if someone has earbuds in and they pull out the earbud, that side of the screen, whatever side of the screen that's on, though that side of the speakers drop down to, I want to say, like probably 15% volume. So you get this very like one side thing, and then someone pulls that out and everything drops down really low, and it's done in a very stylistically cool way. It's done to a point where whenever things aren't synced up to music or there's no music, that's where shit has really hit the fan. Because you can see through the first couple heists that this music is sort of his metronome for what he's doing, and everything around him just kind of happens to fit in with that. The soundtrack is incredible. I highly recommend downloading that on iTunes or whatever you have for music service out there. I've been listening to it a bunch. There's a lot of good stuff in there. A really eclectic like mix of decades and genres and stuff, and it's really neat. So let's start talking about the crew. So the movie is framed around 3 heists, which, as would be expected for an action movie, they go increasingly poorly as time goes on, which ups all the drama. It gets mentioned at one point. So the criminal organization is being headed by a guy named Doc, played by Kevin Spacey. He is sort of the ringleader. He's the one who comes up with all the heist plans. He draws it out. He does the daily briefings, all of that stuff. He's sort of the guy up top who puts it all together. He explains at one point that he never does 2 jobs with the exact same crew. And I guess the idea there is to keep everyone unemotional, to keep everyone focused on the job, and to keep anyone from kind of like planning out stuff because of something that happened differently the previous time, etc. Over the course of the movie, we see, I think, 6 different members of this organization that factor in different ways into the heists. The first heist of the movie, the one that kind of shows off how this whole thing works, we literally start with the 4 of them pulling up. It's always 4 to a car, the wheelman and then the 3 others, who I don't think they really specify what their roles are specifically. So in the first heist, you have 3 people there. You have, oh no, I've forgotten his name. The guy who played, Jon Bernthal. Jon Bernthal, the guy who plays the Punisher on the Netflix Marvel series right now, is part of the crew. I think his character's name is Grizz. He is sort of the tough guy. He is also he's also sort of briefly the audience avatar to explain a little bit of the backstory of Baby. So there's Grizz, and there's also Buddy, played by Jon Hamm, and there's Darling, played by an actress whose name I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't remember. I'm sorry. They go on their heist. It goes reasonably well. They're firing into the ceiling and stuff to spook people. They come out, they get the money, they drive off. Cool. Second heist, we're introduced to a new crew of 3 people. We have Eddie No-Nose, played by Flea. And he has sort of, it looks like he's got like a prosthetic nose, like I guess it's gotten taken off in some way, but do not ask him how he lost his nose. There's, I think his name was JD. He is I guess he's a cat burglar. He's this Asian guy, a lot of tattoos. They pull some funny jokes with him. And you have Bats, played by Jamie Foxx. So they go on their heist. They're doing an armored car. The first one's a bank. This one's an armored car. Things don't go as well, etc. Third one, we have a mix of the 2 crews. We have Buddy and Darling, and we have Bats, and we're doing all of that for the final heist. Baby also is living with his foster dad. He lost his parents when he was a kid. He lives with, I think Joe is the name. Yeah, Joe is his foster dad, who is a just an old deaf black guy. He has a wheelchair. I don't know if he can walk at all, but it's presented at the very least that he just cannot walk. He also has cataracts, so I mean, they make a joke at one point where he's like, "I'm not blind," but it's looking like he might be kind of on his way there. But he's a very old man, so I believe, I don't quote me on this, but I believe the actor is also a deaf actor, so they were able to work with that pretty easily. But he is disapproving of where Baby's money is coming from, and is trying to help him get out of that life, which is assisted by Baby meeting a woman named, or a girl, I don't actually know how old they're supposed to be. They keep it fairly ambiguous, but he's supposed to be, I guess, teens to very early 20s. Like I would say like 21, 22 max. He meets a woman named Deborah, who's a waitress at a diner that his mom used to work at. They flirt. They kind of start, seeing each other a little bit. And the idea is that she wants to leave town because she's got nothing really left, and he is all about that. So with all that in motion, he's trying to get away with her, but his job, it keeps pulling him back, and that's where the main conflict starts to really come to a head. I'm trying to think of how much more I can really talk about without getting into spoilers, and I won't spoil. I won't be dropping any major ones right here, and I'll give you a warning before that happens. But I think that they did an okay job with most of the characters, and I say okay because there was a lot I liked, but even while sitting there watching the first time, being blown away by the movie, the plot felt a little thin. And one of the main complaints that I have heard from Sarah and others is that the movie was stylized to a point where most of the other elements of the movie suffered for it. And I can't say I disagree. I am a big fan of stylistic films, especially stylistic heist movies. I would say that like Snatch, Crank, and Smokin' Aces are among my favorite movies just because I really like that stylistic sort of take on that stuff. So there's that. I don't know that there was a lot of overly predictable stuff. There were definitely some good surprises in there, some good jump scare kind of moments. And there's a lot of elements that are there's a lot of stacking. There's a lot of pieces that I can't think of any elements that don't come back at some point. And in addition, an Edgar Wright trope, especially with his Cornetto trilogy, is at some point in the movie, one of the main characters will explain something. Usually it's here's the plan for what's going to happen, and then the events of the movie follow that to the letter to the point where it almost seems like it was more metaphorically identical. I can't think of any major moments that did that. I think there's one point where Baby recounts the second heist, and it vaguely sounds like the plot to the movie, but it's not done in such an explicit way where it can be like, there it is. There's the moment where, yeah, we'll go down, we'll go to King's Head, and we'll have a pint, that kind of thing. The car stunts were all amazing. I'm reasonably sure that everything was done with practical effects, which is even more incredible because some of that stuff was ridiculous. Really, really good stuff overall. And yeah, I think I need to go into spoiler territory now. So, we are going to, if you want to skip ahead, it's probably going to be a little ways in, but if you go to this time on the, how can I never get my fingers right for this? If you go to this time in the video, you'll jump past the spoilers to closing thoughts. Spoilers are going to be a little bit longer for this one because I want to talk not just the spoilers of the plot itself, but also a theme of the movie that I really enjoyed, but it does jump directly into spoilers. So, spoiler time. First, I just want to talk general spoilers. We're going to get to the big one in a minute. Spoilers. So, I thought Jon Hamm made a pretty neat villain. Because really, at the end of the day, he is the real antagonist. Basically, in any heist movie, most of the characters are in some way antagonistic towards each other, toward the protagonist, any of that. Bats is presented early on as being the antagonist, and then he winds up getting offed first, and we're left with Buddy and Darling. Darling gets offed, and now Buddy is on his roaring rampage to destroy Baby and everything he loves. I thought they did a really good job of flipping all of Buddy's dialogue from early on to make that stuff work. I went to see this movie twice. I saw it last Friday, and then a week later on Thursday night, so a couple days ago for me, but Thursday night I went to go see it again. Ben also came with on both times. Sarah, Beeble, Holly were in there in the first time, and Lindsay was there the second time. So a lot of people got to kind of check that out and have their opinions on it. I think so. The second time around, I specifically listened and watched for dialogue involving Buddy and Bats. And the reason for that is when walking out of the movie the first time, I started thinking about the dialogue, and I was listening and paying attention, but it didn't all stick. Where it gets presented early on that like Buddy is a buddy, and Bats is this crazy asshole who has no respect for any of his accomplices and will do whatever it takes to win and get out with the money. But the second time around, I tried to read more into it, and it looked to me like what was really happening there was that Bats, while he does have a couple screws loose, is still a professional and is still focused to the point where, while yes, off hours, Buddy is right there and he's a pal and he's hanging out and listening to music and all that stuff, and while Bats is a dick to Baby and is like a loudmouth and is kind of just an asshole, when they're on the job, he does occasionally lend a hand in a way where it's like, okay, he's still thinking of this in a professional way. He's still thinking about this as a job. Everyone's got to get out of there. When they go to do their thing with the butcher to go pick up weapons, he knocks on the window and not aggressively in any way, just kind of informatively is like, you should get out of the car. We might not be leaving in this. And then he hands him a gun and says, we gotta look tough for this. Here you go. So there's a lot of stuff like that where it's like, okay. And he does say, and while he does say it in a very aggressive and I think he punches him in the face shortly after sort of way, if you get emotional, that's when you catch a bullet. He's not wrong. But once again, it's a dick way of saying it, but at the same time, he is correct about it. Is that the second you starting to get emotional, that's where you trip up. That's what makes you lose your focus, and that is exactly what happens to Buddy. Darling gets shot up by the cops, and he just loses his mind, and that is ultimately what results in Buddy's death. And it's interesting to see that get flipped around. And that same sort of, he sort of feels betrayed, Buddy, and he goes on this sort of quest to destroy Baby and kill Deborah, the waitress. And it's interesting to see that play out, I guess. Yeah, so I love how the music all syncs up, including when shit goes wrong. The tequila one is great when they blow up the butcher's place. That one is probably the most direct reference that they make to the music in there. I thought the Mike Myers mask thing during the second heist was one of the most hilarious jokes, because compared to Wonder Woman, here's a joke where you do one joke and you let it have a couple punches and then you just walk away from it because it's. I thought you said Michael Myers. It is Mike Myers, and it's like, no, the Halloween mask. This is a Halloween. It's done in a way where it's like lots of little quick punchy bits, and then they move on. Followed up by Baby going like, wait, hang on, I gotta track back the music. Okay, go. And it's like, all right, a lot of little quick jokes like that, really well done. I thought Jon Hamm in the cop car was a fucking great, terrifying image. Him with the music on his side when Baby's on foot was pretty interesting. Oh, you know what? They do slightly drop the way that the plot goes in the movie. When Baby and Joe are sitting and watching TV with the closed captions, when they're flicking through the TV, very similarly actually to Shaun of the Dead, how they would sort of drop a little bit of plot in there. They do kind of walk through the beats of the movie, including a bit near the end where it says like, oh, he's fallen off his horse, so he's done with the horse, right, to a bullfighter. Oh, he's done with the horse, so he's going to have to do the rest of this on foot. And it's like it is appropriate. And Ben actually noticed too, and we both just kind of like looked at each other like, yeah, all right. Yeah, I think I not to say Bats was a good guy, because he certainly wasn't, but I think he was less directly villainous than the movie was trying to build up, and I think that was kind of an intentional choice. That said, his penchant for violence, and because he shoots a security guard, he kills a security guard in the second heist. He almost kills the veteran near the end of that heist. He threatens to kill Deborah. He kills another security guard at the bank or at the post office during the third heist. Like, he doesn't have any issue with bloodshed. He might have killed the guy at the convenience store at the gas station. We don't really know on that one, but he has no real issue with shooting to kill as need be. And that is what sets Baby off. And it's an interesting flip, because at the beginning of the movie, Grizz basically says, like, is kind of insulted that Baby doesn't get his hands dirty and is at less of a risk because he's not part of the gang that will go in and do what needs to be done. Though that said, Grizz in the bank holdup specifically shoots at the ceiling. He never, he'll point it at people, but he never shoots any person. So there's that. So you get this nice spectrum of what people are willing to do and not willing to do. Now I think is probably the part where I'm going to get into my minor, I guess, thesis on themes. And the big theme here is the mask. And what I mean by that is the character you play versus the person you are. Now, what I mean by that is every single character in the movie, with the exception of Joe, has some kind of other name that they go by, either once, many times, something. The lightest example of that is Deborah, who Baby refers to as a Jonathan at the start of the movie, because she has a name tag that says Jonathan because she's new. And it's sort of a light introduction to the idea that sometimes in this movie, characters will be taking on another persona of some kind. And what I want to do is kind of walk through what would that be, 6, 7, 8 characters who all kind of fit into that. And they're all members of the criminal organization. And actually, I guess I'll make it 9 because we have one more character to talk about in there too. But I'm going to try to vaguely go in order of least important in that regard to most important. The biggest spoilers are probably going to be here because I'm also going to be talking real names where applicable. That bonus character is really... Actually, no. The bonus character... There are 2 characters whose real names you do not learn. No, you know what? I take that back. There's only a couple where you learn their real names, but I'm going to be going through quite a bit of those. So let's start at the bottom, work our way up. Eddie No-Nos. His name might be Eddie. I don't really know. There is a rule in the team where you're not allowed to discuss real names, so I'm going to take a wild stab and say Eddie No-Nos' name is not Eddie. He is pretty straightforward. He doesn't really have a whole lot of lines, and there's a brief allusion to the mask when JD, one of the other people in the second heist, asks like, "What happened with your nose?" and he says, well, "That's an Eddie No-Nos no." And it's like it's putting up a little bit of a shield, and that's kind of what these masks all serve as. They're all a way to separate their criminal persona from what they are underneath it. You have Grizz in the first heist. You don't know his name, and he straight up says, "If you don't see me again, it's because I'm dead." And then he leaves the movie and he's out. We have no idea if he survives or not. He is the most likely of all of the members of the heist outside of the heists, besides Baby, to have survived. And that gives us a nice bridge to talk about JD, who puts the Asian in Home Invasion. He actually also has a pretty good moment of referring to the Shield, because he has a tattoo across his neck. It says hat and then like a black smudge, and it's revealed that it used to say hate, and he's like, well, why'd you just make it say hat? And he says, who doesn't like hats? And it says that it improved his chances at employment, basically. So once again, we have him making a move by covering up the E in hate in such a way where he can do these jobs and have another real job outside of that and keep those separate. Next after that, I want to talk about the Butcher and his crew. We don't know his name either. It's unclear if he is a cop, but one, if not several, we know for a fact that one of his henchmen or one of the guys that's there is a cop, dirty cop, Atlanta PD, and possibly some of the others as well. And you know, his whole thing is he lives this mask, and he is the consummate professional. He has this spiel about the pig, and that is all the cuts of meat, which is the guns and the ammo and the grenades, and it's all done in a very specific, practiced, rehearsed sort of way, where it's like this is his $1.5 trillion time selling people these illegal police issue weapons, and this is just kind of his thing. He is the Butcher. He doesn't even have a real name anymore because this is just what he is. The last character that we don't really get to see much of the other side of, and the last one that we don't know their name at all, is Doc, the guy who is spearheading the operation, who also is putting up a mask, and when he's on these heists, he has this sort of cold, just serious, dead tone demeanor. When he's on the job, he has no emotion. He's just like, here's the job, just fucking do it. In a very Kevin Spacey way, he's fantastic. But he lets his guard down around Baby a couple times. He mentions that Baby is the only driver he's ever used since they met. He gives Baby a gift. Not only that, he gives Baby a gift early. He gives him to him one heist early, and it is a pair of driving gloves that are white and red, possibly to suggest the imagery of keeping himself clean, but by continuing to stay involved, he now has blood on his hands. I thought that was a really well done piece of little cinematic nuggetry right there. I thought that was cool. He brings him on the recon of the post office, and also brings his nephew, who he's very amicable towards, so he trusts him with his nephew. And it's like, there's a lot of these pieces where you see that he is actually a dude who cares, at least to some extent. And in the end, he gives Baby and Deborah what they need to escape, because, as he puts it in one of his last lines, I was in love once. And as you know, as Bats says early on, if you start to get emotional, that's when you take a bullet. And again, Doc gets emotional, has this one moment where he's like, I will help you get out of this mess if you never come back, and he gets killed for it in a very gruesome way. I said, oh, like out loud in the theater watching that. The last half hour was crazy. Now from here we have the 4 remaining characters, because we did those 3. We did Doc, we did the Butcher, so we're left with the 4 that went on the final heist. First up, we have Bats, a.k.a. Leon Jefferson III. I thought he was pretty rad. We talked a lot already about his not actually being as directly villainous as the movie might present him to be. And the moment... It's interesting because he is a good intro to these last 4 in that he puts up this very tough persona. He says everybody from the jungle to the... I forget what the other word he used, knows about bats. So he's got this criminal persona known as Bats, and people know about bats. He's got little bats on his neck as tattoos and all that stuff, and he loves this moniker. He loves this character that he plays. And when Doc says, you know what, we're killing the mission, we're done with the mission, everyone go home, we're calling it off, he basically says, like, no, we're doing it, and you know what? Screw it. We can be out of here and we'll do our thing. And Doc says like, yeah, it's pretty easy. Yeah, it's pretty easy to get out of here with a name with 4 letters. And I forget exactly how he says that thing. But Bats is like, you know, my name's not Bats. And he's like, go home, Leon. And he says it like right up in his face. And the moment he says Leon, you just see him just deflate. Like, now everyone knows my name. And he just kind of floats away from that. So you see the power of the mask, where the second he is unmasked, he loses his power. He loses that threatening tone now that everyone knows him as Leon instead of Bats. So I thought that was a pretty good example of how these guys are using their masks as sort of a source of power in some ways, or in others just to use the anonymity as a way to pump up their ego, pump up their game, something like that. So let's move on to the next one. All right, next we have Darling, better or worse, I guess, known as, I gotta remember now, Monica Costello, I believe is her name. And between her and Buddy, and we'll get to Buddy's in a second, just because his is a little bit more involved. Bats just calls her out on it entirely, where she is probably a hooker, lap dance, strip club or escort or something. And Bats calls them out on it for this basically being a joyride. Like, they love their drugs. From the sound of it, it's cocaine. He actually says when Bats is ordering the drinks, everyone likes Coke here, right? Yeah, we're gonna get some Coke. And she actually is so comfortable with it that when they start talking about aliases and stuff, she willingly just says her name. Bats asks and she says Monica, and that's it. I thought the use of the name Monica when it's so close to moniker was kind of cute. I don't know if that was an intentional choice on Edgar Wright's part. I think that was really rad, though. So she willingly removes the mask because she is probably the only one that is the same person on both sides from the sound of it. She's a thrill seeker. She's a joker. She likes just doing stuff, and she's willing to hop out and shoot the cops as need be. She drops one of the banana lines, which I'll be talking about in a minute, and she just sort of gets this kind of enjoyment out of everything. She doesn't seem all that... She is the one who's the least threatening when shit hits the fan for Baby, with the tapes, which we'll also talk about in a minute. So she is the one character who does not seem to care about being unmasked at all. Then we flip it over to Buddy, a.k.a. James Van Horn, and we see a very different response. So Bats pretty well unmasks. I think it was Jason. It might have been James Van Horn. I forget which. I think it was Jason though. So Bats just kind of calls him out and is like, "I bet you're he calls him Wall Street, and he says, "What, did Doc tell you that?" He says, "No, I didn't need Doc to tell me that. I just figured it out myself. Probably a stockbroker. You started to work hard and play hard, but you played a little too hard and got into drugs, and then you started. Oh my God, I forgot the name for it. When you take money from your job, it's not extortion. It's damn it, I forget. But he's basically taking money from the corporate cookie jar, gets caught, leaves, and now he has a life of crime to pay for his life of drugs with Darling. He's the one who drops the line about like, well, I'll see you when the nose bag runs dry. And when Bats calls him out on who he is, a very long drawn out thing, he just has this death stare. And it is the coldest goddamn stare I have seen in a long time. Like he was shooting lasers through Jamie Foxx's face. It was pretty cool to see what his reaction was, where he's like, at this point, he's basically committed to killing Bats. And we also get to see basically in that where as Buddy, he is this kind of jovial, good-spirited, all right, we'll all be friends, we'll hang out kind of guy. Like, let's go grab a beer. But the second you threaten that persona, he becomes this monster. Like and this is where Darling basically says, once he sees red, the only color you'll see is black. Like, it's a threat where it's basically like once he gets into it, you're not walking away from it anymore. And you see that in the end where he becomes just this relentless force of nature as they're chasing each other through the streets and as they're chasing each other through the parking lot and all of those. And it's very impressively done. I thought his use of Brighton Rock as his villain song basically was pretty rad. And the two of them listening to a song together at the beginning gets a bookend at the end when they're listening to Never Never Gonna Give You Up. And it's I think that was a really cool character in how they played the before and after of like, here's Buddy and here's Buddy. Not to mention, by using the name of Buddy, you wind up with a nice duality of, if you're calling someone buddy, means that you're probably their friend. But at the same time, a lot of those same words, buddy, pal, friend, all those things can be used sarcastically, which it gets used sarcastically at the very end of the movie to kind of jokingly mock somebody in that you're not a friend. It's like, fuck you, buddy, that kind of a thing. Like, you're obviously not saying that you're friends. You're saying like this dude is some asshole that, whatever. So I thought that was kind of neat. You don't get quite the same effect out of Darling or Bats. I thought that was neat. Finally, we get to Baby, B-A-B-Y, Baby, a.k.a. Miles, which I thought was a very neat, appropriate name. His whole thing with the mask is he's the only person who very reluctantly wears a mask. Everybody else is into their personas. They love the character they get to play. He's the only one who's desperate to get rid of the mask. And you can see that because after the second heist, once he sunsets the car with the dead JD in it, he immediately takes the driving gloves off and throws them away. He doesn't want them anymore. He wants nothing to do with it. He wants to date Deborah, and as soon as that is threatened, he decides they have to leave town. And it also lends some credence to that, if you let your defenses down, someone can really see through to the true you. So you have a situation where Miles is very reserved and quiet and not saying a lot, and he's trying to protect Deborah by keeping quiet, but she still sees through it and sees like that he is a kind person, that he is a good person, despite this shadowy mystery aura about him. You can also see a bit of a difference in the violence of the movie before and after, where in the first two heists, he isn't getting his hands dirty. And despite the fact that someone dies and a second person almost dies in the second heist, when the heist is going on, when the stuff happens, you don't really see it up close. You only kind of learn about it secondhand because Baby's only learning about it secondhand because he refuses to get involved. And the violence in the movie is done in a very kind of PG sort of way at that point. I guess PG-13 is blood, coming out near someone's head. But once that third heist happens and we impale Bats on the not rebar, but like some kind of piping sticking out the back of that truck, the violence becomes a lot more graphic in the movie from there. You have Bats getting impaled. You have Darling getting shot like a dozen times. You have a lot of cops being visibly just shot in the head and the body and like their jerky reactions to it and stuff. Whereas everything before now, you didn't really see any of that up close. You have Doc, who gets hit by a car, launched into the air, into the lights, explosion of glass and electricity and sparks, hits the ground, gets his head run over, all that crazy shit. And then Buddy himself, who gets thrown off a parking structure onto a flaming car and it explodes. Like, a lot more graphic at that point. Actually, the shooting up of the butcher's place is also like your introduction. It's not quite as graphic as the later stuff, but this is also Baby just finally being involved in that side of that life. I like all of that. I'm trying to remember if there was another thing I wanted to get into there, but I liked all of that. Two quick things that I really liked about other stuff in there. One, I like that he actually did serve time. He got sentenced to 25 years. got out in 5 for good behavior and on parole for, they had character witnesses who were like, yeah, well, he's actually a pretty good dude, but he's in a bad situation. So he did 5 years and he came out and life. But yeah, I like the fact that he didn't really get away. It seemed like he got away, but in the end, he still had to go to jail. You don't really see that much in these kinds of movies. And the last one is bananas. Bananas are used as a code word in the movie for Doc. Whenever he's got clients, they call him after the deal is done and say bananas. And that's how you know that the deal is good, everything's fine. So in the context of the world of the movie, saying bananas is meant to take a tense situation and calm it down. And while that gets a bit of an ironic echo at the end where the dirty cop shows up to kill Doc and says, bananas, and like all that stuff, it actually plays into a different set of 3 references. It's not super connected, but I thought it was neat that bananas kept being used in this way. In the beginning, Joe is not happy with how Baby's making his money, and ultimately is saying, like, you got to stop this stuff. And he goes, what's that? I can't hear you. I got a banana in my ear. And the argument very quickly dissipates. It's him using a banana to take the tense situation and calm it down. The second time it happens is where it gets introduced and all that. The third time is when Baby's music is being played, and it's that awful remixed stuff from all the recordings. And Darling says, this shit is bananas, bananas. And in my mind, there is no doubt that that was meant as an added reference to the bananas thing, because once again, we have this incredibly tense situation where Baby's basically being held against his will and potentially about to be killed. And the music that just got played did essentially exonerate him in the sense that he's not lying. This is what this is being used for. And the situation resolves slightly. So I don't know that there's a ton more that I really wanted to talk about. Thought all the acting was pretty fine. It was a very enjoyable movie to me. I went and saw it twice, which I want to say the last movie I intentionally went and saw twice while it was in theaters was probably Clerks 2 way back in the day. So this is not something I do very often, but it was a very enjoyable movie to me. The style on it was awesome. Edgar Wright is amazing, and I just couldn't resist. So I went to go see it twice. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I did definitely enjoy it. I enjoyed it both times. I didn't have the same the same kind of emotional reaction the second time. Possibly because a lot of the shock factor had worn off. I knew it was coming, so I knew not to be as shocked by some of the later stuff. The last half hour is full of really powerful, like, holy shit moments. So you want to be ready for that. I don't know what else to really say about it. It was, in my opinion, a fantastic movie, but everything that wasn't the music and the syncing of stuff was a little bit underperforming by comparison, because the stylization and the matching up of music stuff was done so well that it almost like points out that there's a difference in the amount of work that went into the different parts. Apparently, Jon Hamm was saying while interviewing that when they got their scripts the first time, they had a USB stick included along with that had all the music for the movie, and beats for that stuff was included in the script directly, so that everyone would kind of know how stuff was going to sync up. So from the get-go, the music was pivotal to the creation of everything. So I think that's really cool. I saw there's a lot of promise in that. There's a lot of attention paid to it. I don't know that I want to see imitators of it, but I am still blown away by everything Edgar Wright does. I'm excited to see what he does next. I highly, highly recommend seeing this movie. It's one of the best movies that I've seen in a long time, and on the style side and what they were going for, in my opinion, what they were focusing on was done perfectly. There was room for improvement from a standard movie angle, but in terms of a heist movie that's got this musical sort of thing going on and a minor character study, I think that it really hit the mark. So I liked it. I recommend it. It's only been out for a week and change. You have tons of time, but go see it while you can. And hopefully Edgar Wright continues making kick-ass movies. So thanks for watching, and these things fold up. Sort of. Look at that. Pretty cool. So this is the end of the review now. I'm just gonna put these on. Yeah. It's pretty good. Go see the movie. Bye.